But I think obviously the thing we wanted to talk about was mainly around the impact of. So obviously everyone is talking about China and America in a trade war. They're going at each other, slapping tariffs and all of that. But actually, there's a bit more to it in the sense that what happens for two and other countries that are caught up in this type of thing. What happens in terms of the where manufacturing happens essentially in the world. And I think we have a good so this is not happening in a vacuum. It already happened really in Trump's first term. He did this kind of stuff before where he went after China, imposed tariffs on them, and that actually shifted quite a lot of things in terms of international trade. But the one thing about Trump is that the guy has the ability to shift the Overton window in the sense that when he goes and he breaks something or he just rushes into something and it causes chaos and all of that, those things actually never go back to where they were. So we have a kind of like natural experiment of this whereby basically Trump did 4 years, he changed a whole bunch of things, he did a lot of crazy stuff, and then Biden came in and did 4 years, but actually, when we look at it, that what did Trump do that Biden reversed, and what are the things that he kept? And it's quite surprising, especially things around trade. So Trump started the trade war with China, but the vast majority of tariffs, I think I saw an analysis that said close to like 70% of the tariffs that Trump brought in were actually retained by Biden. So he didn't reverse them. And in fact, in some areas, he actually went further. So things like the ban on chips and all that kind of thing. So I think we can take that as a kind of possibility that whatever Trump is doing now, he's only going to be around for 4 years. After he's gone, a lot of these things are going to stick, right? So if we take that as the fact that global trade and especially around manufacturing has permanently shifted, then how do countries like Nigeria and other African countries, how do they recalibrate for this new reality, basically? And say,
Yeah,
if this is how things are going to be done now, then where are the opportunities and how do we recalibrate for those opportunities? So I don't know if you want to say something about that, but I think that those are just my thoughts on around how we will tackle this. Yeah.
yeah. So, that's an interesting point. I mean, by the way, can you really believe it's just been 90 days since Trump
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah. It's
elected?
very it's very hard to believe because the guy is there's one chaos is one chaos a day,
It, it,
you
it,
know.
it, it feels genuinely like a year.
Yeah, yeah. In fact,
But
I saw his Easter message today, and I was just like, God, like, I mean, what kind of person is this? Like, he's attacking all his enemies in an Easter message, insulting everybody.
On
Yeah, on
Easter, so
Easter.
like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
like,
So yeah. So
like,
I mean,
so, but,
it's only been
but,
90 days, but this is how it's going to be for 4 years. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's an interesting point you made. Trump being Trump, um, I think this was always on the cards.
Mm,
If he won the re-election in November, which he did, he's never really been shy about his ideas, what he thinks about trade, or
mm,
his stance on economic policy generally. He's a neo-mercantilist of some
mm,
sort who is obsessed with 19th century. But
yeah.
the point you made about Biden, um, I think that is a bit surprising and not so surprising. Surprising in the sense that it felt like it was a genuine chance, Trump losing that 2020 election, to undo some of the bad stuff, and you get a breathing room
Mm,
to create some inertia such that even if this guy or his MAGA tribe or some other crazy
mm,
comes into power, there's very little space for damage. But
yeah.
they blew it because the Biden team and the consensus of even the Democratic Party elite generally have ideas on economics and particularly on trade that intersects with
Mm.
Trump's,
Yeah.
right? So now, why it's been it Trump has introduced a huge shock to the
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
That's the thing, really, because under Biden, yeah, 10-15% tariffs are barely noticeable in prices.
Yeah.
That is different from 100% or 125% tariff, which is like how Trump has really gone about it. And of course, the madness of Liberation Day. So, uh, so if you look at the Democratic Party or the Washington establishment, there is a bipartisan uh, consensus around some form of protectionism for, I would say, about 15 years or so. I
Yeah.
mean, Chuck Schumer, who is the leading Democrat in the Senate, has been on about China since at least 2006. Either
Yeah.
it's about the currency or some form of thing.
Mm.
And it gathered serious steam under Obama, and that was when the China shock hypothesis advanced by David Autor, Danny Rodrik, Gordon Hanson, and co. provide some kind of intellectual foundation for that view to really, really become mainstream. Like, okay, China is a threat and we really have to do something about this. And then you pick up a whole bunch of this along the way, which is, oh, we're losing manufacturing, we're losing a technological edge. We should do this. And the supply chain disruption during COVID just sort of exposed the underbelly of global trade, especially around goods.
Mm.
And it felt like things were never really going to be the same. So, but to follow the tone you set, I think that it's not all hopeless. I think there are opportunities.
Yeah.
I think I think the rest of the world can still be further integrated and trade with each other. The implications for Africa and Nigeria are going to be interesting, to say the least. So I'm curious which direction you want to go with the conversation around that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think in maybe in practical terms, I agree with everything, most of what you said. I mean, like in general, like you said, it's not impossible that a lot of people on the in the Democratic side and even on the left maybe saw Trump as doing their dirty work for them in a way, in the sense that he just went there. These are things that are kind of like maybe things that are difficult to say. You don't just come out and just start attacking your largest trading partner. But this guy he just tweets it. And like I said, once that Overton window has shifted on trade and the idea that China is a malign influence or so all that kind of stuff, I believe it's not going to go back to where it was basically. So so I think, one of the things maybe we should start off on talking about one of the things I wanted to start talking about was what actually happened in Trump's first term in terms of what kind of shifts, happened in terms of manufacturing or in terms of opportunities that went elsewhere. I mean, the most obvious one is Vietnam, right? Vietnam, which there's a geographical component to it in the sense that obviously there are parts of, I mean, the huge manufacturing clusters in Vietnam that are only about just over 100 miles away from China. But I mean, post 2019, Vietnam saw about a 35% increase in exports to the US, and a lot of manufacturing just simply opted out of China and moved there to escape tariffs. Now, that was then obviously when Trump didn't do any kind of liberation day. He didn't make everyone enemies in his first time. He actually went after China deliberately. So it was easier for things to move to Vietnam, to Mexico, but also to Bangladesh, in terms of a lot of things to do with textiles. So, Nike, Adidas, Samsung, all these people moved things out of China and moved elsewhere. And those are hard-won gains for these countries, opportunities that came up that they might not um, easily have come up naturally. So I think one of the things we can really say about China is that if you and I have talked about this a lot. If global manufacturing is kind of like a relay going around, since it's going to China, they with the help of government support and all those kind of things, that a lot of manufacturing that you would expect to have moved out of a country where wages are around $700 a month, right? A lot of manufacturing that you expect to have moved out to poorer places are actually they're still in China. So, I mean, a funny one, I think we discussed this recently, was that 75% of wigs globally are still made in China. Now, wigs I mean, it cannot be beyond anybody to make wigs. Yes, there's an ecosystem around that, but things like that. I mean, you're wondering why is 75 or how and why is 75% of wigs still being made in the country that is fairly, I mean, $13,000 GDP per capita, close to $700 wages a month. That can move to a really poor location. But then you see that the Chinese government has a deliberate strategy to keep as much manufacturing as possible locally. So, and to that extent, they'll throw a lot of subsidies, they'll throw a lot of capital, direct capital at this kind of thing. So, you then get a Trump shock that forces the conversation. So, things that moved to Vietnam in Trump's first term probably would not have moved on their own, But then you get this whole Trump shock that comes in and they just disrupt things, and then things move there. I was reading about just to use a practical example, I was reading about there's an industrial park in Vietnam, and it's been established since several years ago. Now, the guy who set it up, the Belgian company, said in their first 20 years, the 2 decades of the thing, that they received $1 billion in investments for that park. Post Trump, after the tariffs is around from 2018 up until now, they've received $7 billion, right? So you think to yourself that this is a shock, right? This guy has come in and shocked the system, and then but then so you then want to think about, if we've seen this happen in the first term, what is going to happen this time around? Is it electronics? Is it textile? Is it apparel? And what are the key drivers? What determines where these things move to, and where are the opportunities? Again, we talked about the example of socks recently, where China produces something like maybe about 2 billion pairs of socks every year, and all of that thing. These things, they cost about 20 cents to make. With the tariffs, it's just not possible to make them in China anymore. So people are going to go to Pakistan, they're going to go to El Salvador, that sort of thing. And I mean, socks, right? If Nigeria can't make socks, I mean, you might as well pack it in as a country. I mean, how difficult can it be to train? So my what I'm trying to look at for a lot of this stuff is like, okay, what are sectors going to shift around now? And essentially what Trump is doing with the tariffs, assuming that they stick or some of them stick, is that it just makes it impossible to manufacture a lot of low level to carry out a lot of low level manufacturing in China anymore. If tariffs are 125%, you can always go somewhere else where it's tempting. So I think those are my thoughts that was playing around in my head in terms of what comes next, and based on what we saw in the first Trump term, where tariffs are used as a weapon in a trade war, when things spill out to other places, what is next for a country like Nigeria and even Africa in general?
Yeah. So the way I sort of look at it, the counterfactual I play with in my head when I think about these things is that um, I think that uh, the evidence sort of, although it's not a consensus, but it sort of showed that the real effect of the first Trump shock, which is Trump 1.0, in economic terms was fairly negligible. I think what really, really shifted things significantly was COVID. right? And how that exposed the geopolitical tensions, like there was a global public health emergency, and you sort of know who your friend is and who
Yeah.
isn't your friend,
Yeah,
depending on what
we
you
were
need.
fighting over gloves at one point, yeah,
Yeah,
and all that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I think after COVID was when this whole concept of friendshoring and sort of reordering the global supply chain and where things are manufactured start to matter significantly. And I think what Vietnam, like you said, did that was pretty smart is it played the geopolitical game really well by managing to stay friends with China and the US,
hmm
you know, not managing to piece off the two big players who are in the ring fighting. And then, I mean, you get to export to the US and you get to absorb some manufacturing capacity from China. And
yeah,
that way, China also get to export to the US at zero to very low tariffs because the trade and the manufacturing flows through Vietnam rather than China, who is the enemy. And I think the Trump team, if you can call them that, whoever is advising him,
mm,
uh, were watching all of that and felt, so that was what you did the first time. Well, this time we are hitting everybody. Like there's no
mm,
escape route. And I think going forward, I think a few things are going to matter. Uh, One is that I don't think global manufacturing would be so different. I think Asia is still going to retain a significant share because there is a lot of embedded knowledge and technological know-how in that region generally. The question is who is going to buy? Who is going to absorb a lot of the demand that is going to move out of America? It seems like the EU, but that's not so straightforward
yeah,
either. Uh, Canada, we know, is also going through its own thing. It's underpopulated. It's not really a huge market, although it can be if it gets it out. So the question is, where is all that demand going to go? Because another implication for being the global net importer, the way America is that you also have to have a lot of domestic capacity for capital absorption and consumption.
yes,
I don't think there's any country in the world right now that can borrow as much as America does to consume
mm,
domestically.
yeah,
So I think that is going to be a serious challenge, and I think that raises the probability of a global economic recession significantly.
mm,
Um, so another thing about China is if I look at China's strategy since perhaps maybe 2001, and I ask myself, where does all the anxiety come from? So the service sector has overtaken since the opening up in 1978. The service sector has overtaken the manufacturing sector since at least the late 1980s.
yeah,
So it's not like China is so dominated by manufacturing. But what G basically did is a deliberate attempt to kill the service sector.
yeah. I mean,
To say that
he destroyed
exactly, to say
the
that
education industry overnight. So really,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So basically, to say that no, we are not going to allow this structural shift. And I think part of that anxiety is that for China, it's always going to be too early, which makes it a bit complicated. The population is rapidly aging, and for all China has achieved, like you said, it's just a $13,000 GDP per capita. It's not rich. China is not as rich as Mexico or Uruguay, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of average income. So I think generally, politically, that is the political elite are in a perpetual state of anxiety that if the structure of the economy shifts further such that we start shedding manufacturing jobs, which at least creates excess income for people to save, their a high saving culture and
Mm-hmm.
economy, then what is going to happen? So that anxiety in China, I don't think it's going away anytime soon unless there's some kind of demographic uh, miracle. So I think there is a lot of manufacturing capacity to be picked up. China is going to slow down. Uh, how you become China's friend and America's friend is still going to matter.
Mm-hmm.
It's still with Trump that even with all the madness, he cares about his ego. I mean, he says stuff like, "What leaders they are calling me, kissing my ass, sucking up to me," like. So, I mean, you can say a few nice words, get a fairly favorable bargain or trade deal with America and attract a lot of Chinese investment in terms of manufacturing. I think that would be a useful strategy
Yeah.
for any
Okay.
serious country going
Yeah.
forward.
Okay. So that's a good point. And if we take the point, and I think we can mostly agree that look, this manufacturing jobs, they're not going back to America, right? They're not Americans are not going to be assembling iPhone. So this is all I mean, there's just no world in which it happens where you're going to open up factories, employ 100,000 Americans, trying to assemble phones, manufacture shoes, that sort of thing. So, my sense, well, I think my working assumption is that maybe some high-end manufacturing will come back, right? Or some manufacturing that already happens in America would expand. So I've been reading about some like steel companies, for example, in the US, who orders are increasing significantly. All of a sudden, obviously, you've raised the price of China, so maybe it makes sense to buy some stuff locally. But then the other point is, and which is what we were talking about earlier, is that a lot of these things will simply shift elsewhere because it's not like, you know, Trump in his first term, he wanted manufacturers to come back to America, but I mean that never happened. He simply shifted elsewhere, and like you said, that annoyed some of his inner circle in the sense that, oh, okay, we clamped down here and everybody just moved here, and those huge billions of dollars of Chinese investment just moved to Mexico, and they were serving the American market as well, and it just kind of looks like taking us for a fool or something. But then, I mean,
Yeah,
when
I,
we,
I, I lost power, but gone.
yeah, okay, I can see, I can see you guys. So if we assume that those manufacturing will simply, most of it will simply shift, especially for lower value stuff, like socks, like clothes, like shoes, and all that kind of stuff. If we assume that most of them will shift, how can an African country like Nigeria ensure that some of that shift lands on his doorstep? Now, the 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 prognosis, or however you might call it, does not look great. We've had AGOA, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, for God knows how long. It was Chinese companies that benefited the most of it in Africa, in the sense that they set up in African countries and used the AGOA opportunity to simply manufacture in Africa and export to America.
Yeah,
Obviously, there is a challenge now in the sense that it is likely that AGOA is going to be sunset by the end of this year. Maybe there's an opportunity. So one of the things I'm thinking that maybe there's an opportunity for a country like Nigeria to lead on getting America to extend AGOA. I mean, we can see what the Trump administration is doing on Africa, for example. So the
yeah,
article we were discussing the other day was that they actually think that the the threat from China is overblown in the sense that they feel like it is scaremongering to get America to continue spending in Africa because they keep saying anytime maybe they want to cut back, somebody will say, if we leave, China will take over. But now you get the
Yeah.
whole Trump administration guys saying this is all overblown stuff. If we leave, nobody's taking over anything, and we're going to leave, right? So you can see, for example, the executive order that was leaked or that the New York Times was reporting today, actually quite alarming in the sense that they are pretty much cutting down everything in Africa, shutting down embassies. They are creating 4 global spheres, and Africa is not even one of them. What they are going to do is just maybe send a couple of people to go to Africa, talk to people, and all that. So it's a real bare bones approach. But I wonder, is there an opportunity for Nigeria as a country to say, look, we will take the lead on this stuff and say, hey, you are still going to need to manufacture stuff, right? And Africa, okay, yes, we know you say you don't want they are saying stuff like PEPFAR, that the E in PEPFAR is actually emergency. It stands for emergency, and it's been going on for what, 2 decades or
Yeah.
something now.
Yeah.
And they say,
That was
hey,
laughable.
yeah, that was quite funny. And they say, look, Africans should take care of their own healthcare and pay for their own healthcare. So, but trade is a separate thing. So trade is not, we're not asking for aid, that sort of thing. But is there a world in which you see a country like Nigeria taking the lead on AGOA and saying, look, okay, look, we know you don't want to give us aid anymore. We'll butter you up another, but actually we still want the trade. So if you give us AGOA for another 5 years, extend it for another 5 years, and this time around we'll try and say, you know what, we're going to take advantage of it, and you can actually, US companies can come and invest. We'll give you all kinds of opportunities or whatever. Come and invest in African countries, and then we use that trade opportunity. That seems like a to your point about a world in which you can be China's friend and America's friend without alienating both of them. If you get AGOA extended, for example, you will definitely attract Chinese investments to come in, and you will also attract American investment. So they still get their low cost manufacturing stuff, and China can also still transfer a lot of the excess capacity. But I don't know what you think about that. Unfortunately, recently last year, I know there were conversations around for Nigeria to actually try and lobby for AGOA with the US, but I mean, I think the ministers have didn't really take it serious. And in fact, there was a conference that was held. I think it was in South Africa late last year, and Nigeria actually didn't attend. And this was to discuss AGOA. Because these warnings have been, they've been firing these warnings even under Biden. That look, this
Yeah.
thing, you're not really using it. You get like 100 billion capacity, and less than 5 billion of it is actually being used. So we're gonna shut down this thing since you don't use it or anything. But I don't know if there's a way maybe Nigeria can actually take up that lead this time around and try and get that thing extended just as the first step, and then we'll see what happens.
Okay. So again, apologies to viewers. I've lost power. I'm working to get emergency power back on, but I mean it is what it is. So so it might feel awkward hearing just my voice without seeing my face. So I think the short and empirical answer to your question is no. But but I'm going to give a fairly long-winded reason as to why. So, I mean, to go back to where you started from, so about jobs moving back to America, getting back some manufacturing. I think one area where uh, people make policy in America and people are sharing this, I'm not really thinking in a very basic way, is that so everything that America produces, say you bring in some manufacturing and all that, who's going to buy if you have a hostile trade relationship with uh, all of your trading partners, basically? Are you going to consume everything you like hypothetically bring back and produce? Are you going to be the sole consumer? So, which means that if you're bringing these manufacturing capacities back and you're trying to remain globally competitive, it essentially means that you still plan on exporting in
Mm.
one form or the other, which means you actually need a friendly trade regime for you to export to those markets. So, which may be problematic if you are fighting everybody and saying you're being cheated, tariff this, tariff that. And I mean, you will be subject to those same tariffs. Another point is that most of what America buys from China, I know people focus a lot on finished products, the iPhones, the Birkin bags, whatever. Most of what America buys from China are intermediate inputs.
Yeah.
And when you disrupt that, it takes a while. Even if you're going to reshore, bring back a lot of the capacity and the know-how for those things back to the US, it takes a long time.
Yeah.
So you're going to lose jobs. The economy is going to contract for sure. So I think when the serious economic indicators like inflation, unemployment, and overall aggregate demand numbers start showing up in the red, I think people are really going to start panicking and trying to look for how to reset. So, but specifically to your question, I think it goes back, the old China US relationship and that narrative goes back to the heart of one thing that you and I always talk about, either in writing or in person, is that development primarily is a supply side phenomenon.
Mm.
And I think that is another lesson America is failing to learn in the whole way. China really, really, I mean, everything we are seeing now happened with Japan in the late 1980s. Surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, it started with chips
Mhm.
as well, where American manufacturers lost a lot of share and know-how to Japanese firms, right? So I say it's supply side policy because it's not about how you protect your market. It's about what you invest in your market. It's about how serious you take acquiring the know-how. It's not even about importing the tech itself. You still need some local know-how and ability for you to become proficient
Mhm.
and become externally or globally competitive, which is something China has done really, really well, which is something we can agree that America hasn't really done. It's mostly in the private sector. A lot of supply side policies in America has shifted to the private sector. I don't know if you read John Cochrane's
Yeah,
essay about tariff.
the grumpy economist. I think. Yeah, I read that.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of what America has been doing for the past 3 decades is to borrow to consume.
Yeah,
So
to boost consumption.
the supply side has basically been neglected, and which was for, however we might disagree with it, it's something that China really, really did, either through subsidies, either through forcing foreign multinationals to share IPs with local firms through all kinds of means. So development policy is supply side, right? If we go all the way back, even to the Industrial Revolution, I mean, there was this excellent podcast by the FT, the Economics Show. I think I shared that episode with you, Richard Baldwin and Martin Wolf.
Mm-hmm.
So Richard made a point uh, that I found interesting. He said there were three phases of globalization. One is goods crossing borders. The other, the second one is factories crossing borders.
Mm-hmm.
And now the phase we are in is offices crossing borders.
Yeah.
But the way I looked at it is, if we go a bit back to the Industrial Revolution, we will see that the pattern has largely held even till now, is that the first stage is ideas crossing borders. And I don't think there's any way you can prevent that.
Yeah.
The
I think I
British,
think I think Brad DeLong made this point as well in Slouching Towards Utopia, which was a really
yeah,
good point in the sense that, the internet, once the internet came, all of a sudden your factory did not need to be somewhere where you could drive to. So
exactly,
you first got the fax, but then all of a
exactly,
sudden, previously in the past, when there was no internet or no fax, a company, your suppliers had to be somewhere where you could drive to in 30 minutes. But when the
yeah,
internet came, you could draw stuff and then just fax it and send it over. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Mm.
manufacturing sort of became modular in the sense that you can have the same blueprint, you can
Mm.
upload it online, and people working in different parts of your company, in different parts of the world,
Mm-hmm.
can be working on the same products at different points of the value chain, right? So you really cannot prevent ideas from crossing borders. Manufacturing ideas leak right from the textile mill in the Industrial Revolution to France, to Netherlands, all the way to America. And if America learns a bit from its history, is that it was able to steal a lot of the British manufacturing and market
Mm-hmm.
share because it went about supply differently. So there was this fantastic book by Joshua Freeman called Behemoth. You know, it really, really went granular about how America's first textile mills were run when they were set up, mostly in Massachusetts. They basically saw what the labor agitations were in Britain and where a lot of the tensions was, and they corrected for those things in their own factories. They provided hostels for workers, some very generous welfare packages and working conditions, right? Which is what you do if you are serious about, oh yeah, I want to do this thing. I want to invest in this thing. I want to become proficient in this thing. I want to be an exporter. I want to start making this thing. So to answer your question, in Africa, Nigeria, which is closer to home for both of us, we don't even think about the supply side at all. The only thing we've been doing Trumpism before Trump, right? Yeah. So I mean, I made this point. I make this point to you all the time. There is only one trade policy in Nigeria, and that is protectionism,
Mm-hmm.
either tariffs or outright ban.
Mm-hmm.
That is silly. That even barely qualifies as policy. Where, oh, we should stop importing X. What's the rave now is that, I mean, I just lost power. You saw,
Yeah, solar panels.
solar panels. It's a sector that is barely growing, but at least catching on with middle class and high income households as an alternative to the grid. And of course, we know how much energy poverty there is in Nigeria. But someone in their Trumpian wisdom thought, oh yeah, we import too much solar panels, and I mean, that already tells you everything you need to know, that we are not a serious people, either agriculture or any kind of uh manufacturing. So until we have a plan, until we get serious with that plan and start acting, I think that we will just suffer for nothing.
Mm.
And 10 years from now, we'll still be talking about, yeah, Africa could have done this, Nigeria could have done this, but I mean, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So,
Oh
I
well.
mean, even with AGOA,
Mm.
even with AGOA, we can blame the China shock, right? But how exactly, what is our policy with Chinese firms that work here in Nigeria?
Mm.
What is our policy
Yep.
on IP? What is our policy with knowledge sharing?
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
what is our policy with
Mm-hmm.
co-investing?
Yeah.
What is the nature of the economic partnership other than okay, come and invest. If we are not begging for money.
This point, like people always say, oh, like there was a time in my life when all I was talking about was Dangote, and I always say this thing, and I tell people, somebody asks me now, I keep saying it, that look, Nigeria has had the cement policy, well, if you can call it a policy, right? That policy came in around about the crossing between Obasanjo's first and second term, so 2 decades, right? We've had that. And cement is not a particularly complex thing. Again, I always say it, I say it all the time. This product has a 2,000-year manufacturing history. The Romans were making it before Jesus was born, right? If you go to Rome, all the Colosseum, it was built with Portland cement. So there's nothing particularly unknown about cement manufacturing. So it's not nuclear science. It's not neural networks or anything. It is a fairly old technology, right? But as of today, it is actually crazy that you have one Chinese company, the same Chinese company called Sinoma, right? This company is building cement plants for Dangote, and it is also building cement plants for BUA. It's actually, I don't know any other country where.
Oh, it's also building cement plant for
another. For a third one as well. So you have one Chinese company, right? One Chinese company with their technology building for multiple people. Now Dangote obviously is a billionaire, BUA is a billionaire, and whoever is coming. And I keep thinking to myself that in any other country, would this be considered even normal that more than 2 decades after you've had a cement policy, you cannot actually own a fairly straightforward and and well-known technology? So Dangote cannot build a cement plant on his own today. He can't. He will need the Chinese guys to build it for him. Same thing with BUA. So these guys are just basically, right, okay, we sit inside the policy, the government protects us from competition from outside, we get a Chinese guy to come. I mean, at one point, the Chinese guys were actually helping Dangote dig out the limestone from the ground. So basically, they were digging out the limestone, they were processing it for him, they were turning it into cement, they were using their technology, everything. And I'm just thinking, like, was there no idea that, I mean, this is something that would never happen in China.
Think about the implications of what you just said. Mm-hmm. Nigeria is a peace poor country, right? I mean, America can yell, but it's the richest economy in the world. Americans are stupidly rich, right? But Nigeria is peace poor. I mean, Nigeria is where the MAGA movement should actually take a serious foothold in some very weird sense. No, honestly, because Nigeria as a poor country, in the scenario you just described, is exporting manufacturing jobs to China. Essentially, that is what it means.
Yeah.
Like these are the jobs, these are the know-hows, these are the capacity we actually need, but we are just outsourcing it.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's actually crazy, yeah.
And it goes back to the policy, like you said, when you were designing this policy, what was your goal? I think we cannot shy away from that question. If your goal is, I do not want, I remember one of the early articles we posted, I forgot which of us wrote it. Who among us wrote it now? There's a lot more, I think it was something like, there's a lot more optimism or something like that from a country that wants to sell to the world than one that wants to stop buying from the world. If your cement policy is purely, I want to stop importing cement, then this is what you get.
Yeah, it's a very narrow view of the world.
Yeah. So, but if what drove that policy was Nigeria wants to become a global leader in cement manufacturing, right? It's a very small difference, but that it is a significant shift in how you implement.
Yeah.
So again, it goes back to your question. No, we are not serious. And we can talk from now till, I mean, not us, I mean, the government, I mean, people make familiar noises. There's going to be all kinds of summits, but we are not serious. I don't see anything coming out of it.
Okay. Okay. So I think so. If we take that as if we take that as read and say, Nigeria is the place that history always happens to, yeah, and I mean, obviously, regardless of what Nigeria does, something is going to happen over the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, where do you see Nigeria landing? Assuming we are passive observers in all of this trade war, so America and China become really hostile at each other. They recalibrate at a different level. Certain things can no longer be manufactured in China. For America, they will move elsewhere. Other countries take advantage, and countries like Nigeria are merely passive observers. You lose the U.S. The U.S. doesn't care about Africa, at least under Trump. So let's say if Trump cuts everything down to zero in terms of Africa, right? He shuts down embassies. He shuts down trade missions. He shuts down Africa expertise in Washington, that sort of thing. If we assume that all of that stuff, let's say it goes down to zero, if we assume that the next person after Trump is a Democrat who is a bit more friendly towards Africa, those things will not go back to where they were before. So if Trump cuts down 100 embassies, for example, or 100 offices across Africa to zero, the next guy might come and say he restores 50 of them or something. We never really go back. I think this was the point I was making at the start, whereby Trump has a kind of ability to shift the Overton window and then makes it very, very difficult for even his successors to go back. So if we take that as read that, okay, history is going to happen anyway, whether or not Nigeria participates in it, where do you see Nigeria landing in all of this in 4 or 5 years' time after the dust of this trade war has settled? America and China have recalibrated on and are now dealing with each other on a different level. They are hostile, just like just like a version of the Cold War, but then what is going to happen to Nigeria and Africa? Are we going to then, out of a lack of choice, go further into the embrace of China? And then what kind of terms will you get from China if, America doesn't really care about you and China is your only choice? They kind of take it. I mean, the Chinese generosity, if you can call it that, towards Africa has actually drastically reduced over the last decade. They're not really throwing money at Africa a lot more. They're not interested in losing money anymore. I mean, what happens, right? When would the EU step in? Would the EU plug some gaps? Or I mean, if America turns its back on Africa, where does Nigeria go? What does this leave? In 5 years from now, where is Nigeria going to be as the dust of all of this settles?
I mean, the EU is going to have a lot on its plate to deal with. The tension from the trade, and again, if uh, there is some form of global economic recession, the tension within the union is going to become even more uh, pressing. So I think we might see a few other countries trying to go the way of the UK with Brexit. So I think the EU is going to have a lot to deal with, and also how to solve the whole Russia Ukraine problem, which does not seem like it's going away anytime soon. And of course, there is the uh, migration crisis, quote and unquote. So the EU is going to have its hands full, such that whatever it is that they might do for Africa in terms of even strategic partnership is not going to move the needle. However, what I think is going to happen, even between now and the end of Trump, is that, again, I think this all fits into Trump's pattern. This chaos of uh, the approach to
Mm,
Africa. I
mm,
think it's deliberate chaos to create space to make a deal.
mm.
So the
Yeah.
question then is, what kind of deals can African countries make? We know our elites, we know their interests, we know what they prioritize. I
Congo's
think I think we are going to go full steam ahead on natural and primary resources. I think those are the only things we have to offer the world right
So,
now.
so you're talking
People
about
are,
something like what Congo has just done, where basically,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so
yeah,
in Congo's case, for example, they felt they were getting hostility from Rwanda, and China didn't intervene. So they've actually asked America, okay, come and take our minerals, and just just be there and be help us be the bully, in the neighborhood,
yeah,
and so that yeah.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, even in northern Nigeria, we see that the insurgency is back on the rise,
Mm.
and of course, we know how much America's support in terms of counterterrorism matters. So I see a situation where the U.S. State Department is going to say, yeah, make a deal. Give us a few mineral sites in Zamfara, in the Plateau, in exchange for military support. So I think resource dependency will, in the next 5, 6 years,
Intensify.
is going to intensify, and the manufacturing we do not have is even going to die further.
Mm.
Right? And 10 years from now, hopefully under different circumstances, certainly under different circumstances, you and I are still going to be talking about the Africa problem and why we can't make it.
Yeah. So this gives me is a kind of it creates a nightmare scenario where obviously Nigeria has some rare earths, and the thing with the rare earths is that they are actually distributed around the world, but about 99% of the processing is in China's hands. So China controls all of that. But the problem with
Yeah.
processing of rare earths is that it's such a dirty, labor intensive, environmentally harmful thing that honestly, if you ask me, I don't want it. Like, I mean, it's not my call to make, but if you were to ask me that, say, okay, Nigeria has rare earths. Do you want Nigeria to be a rare earth processing place? I will say, give me something else. Basically, if I had a choice, it would not be what I'll pick. But now you get a situation whereby Nigeria has a fair amount of rare earths, and China is weaponizing the processing of that. So maybe you then get a kind of situation where the US says, okay, you've got some rare earths, kick out the Chinese,
Mhm.
give it to us, and then they will establish the processing of that stuff within Nigeria. And like I said, it's a very, very dirty business in there. So I mean, if that that would maybe get China out of it, and then the US then has some kind of strategic control of rare earths, and they can use it for its computers, solar panels, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a kind of situation that would not be ideal. It will not be what I would choose, but there's a real
But but
possibility that's what
but
will
but
happen.
even the scenario you just created, as nightmarish as it is, and I share your concern
Mm.
about that, you can still say that that creates jobs,
Oh yeah, it will
right?
create jobs. It will create. It's very labor intensive.
So,
It will create
but
jobs.
in the case of Nigeria, if you consider all the other things downstream of rare earth processing, what the scenario I would even imagine is a case where rare earths are mined in Nigeria and processed in Niger or Chad
Mm.
or
Yeah,
somewhere close,
yeah.
because we are that unserious. So
Oh,
we are that unserious.
oh,
So
okay. All right.
um
I guess a final point today before we wrap up is aid, right? So whatever we think about it, however we talk about it, there's a fair amount of aid that supports a lot of social services in Nigeria. A lot of it comes from the EU, a lot of it comes from America, and all this kind of stuff. A disturbing part of all of this is that I think Adam Tooze, I don't know if you saw it, he posted something recently about how as a lot of countries have quietly followed America's lead. Because the thing is that with all this aid is that a lot of these countries, for example, they committed, say, is it 0.3% of GDP to aid and all those kind of things. Now, a lot of certainly I can say for the UK that as resources become scarcer, people need, public services are in dire need of investment, and it cuts across a lot of rich countries. One thing that people start to target and get angry about is the aid budget, and they'll say, "Oh, why are we sending billions abroad when the NHS needs funding, or we need to provide all kinds of stuff here." So what I think Adam Tooze's post a few days ago was showing was that America has announced its own. Trump has done it loudly. We're cutting US aid and all those kind of things. But quietly, a lot of other rich countries have taken the opportunity to cut back. And especially in Europe, whereby everybody now needs to spend more on defense, on
Yeah.
weapons, right? So America is also cutting back from that. And the aid budget is always an easy target in the sense that, okay, you know what? We're sending $200 million to Nigeria for girls' education or to do some kind of stuff I mean, like Nigeria can take care of its own girls. Let's use this money to buy a few more weapons to deal with an aggressive Russia. America is so that aid budget, and we're not just losing America's aid. We're also losing a lot of other countries who use the opportunity to hide under America's shadow of retrenchment and also retrench on their own. Now, potentially, this could cause serious problems. I mean, I had a conversation with a friend who works in vaccines a while ago. I think it was last year or year before last, and I was quite alarmed at some of the things that, in the sense that, what she was saying is that for something like Gavi, right, the Global Vaccine Alliance thing, they've been
Yeah.
trying to get Nigeria off it because all the indicators where you graduate out of basically somebody else paying for your vaccines, Nigeria has exceeded all of them. So essentially, they want Nigeria to graduate to paying for more of its own vaccines. But what they were telling me was that the Nigerian officials were more essentially daring them and saying, you can't cut us off, that you can't graduate us off, that that it will be really bad for you if the whole world hears that you've cut vaccine funding for a country like Nigeria of 200 million people. So Nigeria basically was saying, like, do your worst, like you can't get us. So they've been extending Nigeria, extending and extending. Now, this kind of thing can be really disturbing in the sense that if people now become emboldened and say, well, yeah, if you can't pay for your own vaccines, I mean, I think the numbers I heard at the time was, say you get roughly, like, say, one vaccine dose, the main vaccine, I forget what it's called. Is it called MMT or something? But the main vaccine that every child gets, the one that covers measles,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
two other things. So I think,
Yeah.
say something that it costs something like, say, $1.50 per dose, right? And Nigeria only pays about 30 cents, right? So out of that, so these guys have been trying to get Nigeria to at least move up to the majority, at least 80 cents, more than half of it, but Nigeria just refused. So potentially, if aid gets cut off and all of this, and then all of a sudden Nigeria faces a bill of, say, maybe $1 billion to pay for all the kind of things that people have been paying for, where does this leave us? Aid, I mean, look, we all have our issues with aid, and the challenges, the dependency it creates, and all those kind of things. But I think, however, whatever you might think about it, the worst way might be to just yank it off, because you then get you unleash real suffering, and just imagine just 1 year of kids not getting immunized in Nigeria. That problem will echo into the future for generations.
That's the real. I mean, from everything we've been talking about for an hour, that's the real nightmare scenario
Yeah.
in my own estimation. Like you said, we all have our issues with aid. Um, Even some of the biggest aid critics, I can think of someone like William Easterly, for example, who has been like on a very, very
For
vehement
decades.
crusade.
Yeah.
Yes, for decades, is calling what is going on madness. So I had an email exchange with him a couple of weeks back. Like, this is madness. So, but I think the serious implication I see with the aid thing, especially given how dependent we are. I mean, it's the one thing that genuinely threatens the future because it goes at the heart of human capital itself.
Yes.
Because we're talking education, we're talking health,
Mhm.
and it's a serious. And again, we can't ignore the. You just talked about Gavi. One of my favorite examples when I talk about health is we now have a malaria vaccine
Mhm.
that has been tried, tested, and is being rolled out in some of the high risk countries in the world. Based on Gavi's conditions, Nigeria does not qualify for free vaccine.
You have to pay something.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, but we just passed a record budget last year. We're about to even surpass that record with 2025 budget. I think that has even been passed. Nigeria could not, on an emergency basis, a third of global malaria deaths is still in Nigeria.
Yep.
And yet, the federal government of Nigeria or the health ministry cannot say that, okay, we are not even going to spend anything on health this year except getting all kids vaccinated against malaria. That is the one thing we are going to do in 2025.
I don't know if you saw the health officials' comments in The Economist from Nigeria, and I read it. I was like, I mean, even if you think about this thing, if you think it in your head, you shouldn't say this kind of publicly. So they asked him that, when is Nigeria going? And he said, yeah, we hope someday. That was the answer he gave. So basically, we hope that sometime soon or someday in the future that we'll be able to roll it out. I'm like, just the whole, like you said, just the whole
Like
nonchalance,
we
like
don't
just like, yeah,
we
this is not a
we
big deal.
and
We'll do it
you
whenever.
I mean you would think that okay for a country that takes that kind of attitude, or maybe the risk is so low. A third of global malaria
Yeah,
deaths
we're ground zero
is
for
in
malaria. Yeah,
Nigeria.
yeah.
So if we can't, so why do people expect America to pay for it? If we can, but the issue is, I mean, and we are already seeing the preview of what is going to happen, right? If you think about the fate of refugees, if you think about, uh, so Lagos State or whatever gets a lot of credit, a lot of undeserved credit, and I say that with all seriousness, from the Ebola response in 2014, 2015. But if you investigate the facts, you see that 99% of that work, why that did not become a case of serious bad news, was the work of PEPFAR.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically the
PEPFAR, it
work.
was an amazing. I always say it's probably one of the best things America has ever done in Africa. It's amazing, right? Doctors
So
who trained under that thing, they still talk about it even decades after. But,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it was basically what PEPFAR did across the border between Benin and Nigeria here.
Mm-hmm.
Set up multiple testing areas, responses, funding, training, interventions, tracing, you know. So this is good. And when you look at even the fate of refugees, I mean, conflicts are going to rise in Africa, right? Uh, when you look at what has happened, one of my favorite factors is that under Biden, America spent, was it about 18 or 20 something billion in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, for that same period or less, a more serious war was going on in Sudan and nobody cared.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nobody cared.
Yeah. I mean, the
I
Sudanese
mean,
they basically just destroyed their own country, right? These two guys fighting each other, just two people's ego fighting each other, and they basically just destroyed the whole country, and nobody,
yeah,
like,
I mean, Central African Republic is on record to kill off about a sixth of its population. And that conflict also has been going on for about 2.5 years. You know, these are things that we can agree that they are not ideal, that foreigners are the ones that come in, emergency responses, free zones, no conflict areas, feeding areas for refugees. And now, when there is nobody to even do some of these things,
Oh boy.
I
Oh boy.
I seriously contemplate
Oh boy.
what is going to happen.
Yeah, if you
And
is that saying that if you think things are bad now, yeah, yeah,
yeah, so I think even more worrying for Africa is the political instability that we are going to see if some of the worst case scenarios of these things play out over the next decade. So it will be truly horrible. Uh, Perhaps it will be horrible enough for a reset, some kind of global emergency, and but it's still going to cost needless human lives.
yeah. Okay. All right. Good. Thanks, Toby. I think we've exceeded an hour, which we planned to do, but that was a good chat. Probably we should
Yeah,
do this a bit more often. And
yeah, yeah,
as this thing,
definitely.
I mean, this is a as they say, this is a fast moving situation. So who knows what's
Oh
going to
yeah,
happen?
I
You know,
mean, in the next 30 days, who knows? Who
who
knows?
knows exactly? So we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see if that executive order, which was reported today, if that gets passed, then that will be have serious implications, and a lot of thinking will be required for African countries. You know, like how do we do it? But anyway, good chat, and thank you to everyone who joined in. Hopefully, you enjoyed the chat, and we'll catch up with you again soon. All right.
All right. Thanks,
All right.
Faith.
Thanks, Toby. All right.